Hello, everyone. Curt Doolittle from the Natural Law Institute here with my good friend Luke Weinhagen. We are going over chapter by chapter analysis of his wonderful book, the Primal Primer, which you can get on pretty much everywhere, right? And in every format.
Yeah.
You got a glare there. There you go. I'm very effusive supporter of this because Luke came to us originally. He says, I'm going to go work on this thing. And I'm like, I don't understand the value of that. And of course I was the idiot because he was smart, right? And now I see what he's getting at, and it's brilliant. So we're working on chapter 8 today. We've gone over just to remind the audience, there's this sort of pattern where he shows a situational awareness skill. How do you raise your consciousness of what's going on in the environment around you? And then he gives us a basic skill that, like, making cords and what are the ones? Making cords, making shelter,
Water,
making and filtering water,
food, things like that.
right? And so today we're on a topic of situational awareness, right? So what is it you want the public, the audience, to gain from the wisdom of this chapter?
Well, if you spend any time in environments that also include other people, there's a lot of information you can draw from how those other people are navigating those environments. And that's what we're talking about today in this chapter about proxemics. Right? It's literally the study of proximity, how people use space, how people utilize what signals people give off with their spatial manipulation, the use of the space around them. So it covers things like how people move through space, as well as how people orient themselves within the space, and what signals we can draw from those behaviors, right? So we're doing a lot of behavioral analysis with this piece. Right?
Is that something that it's like, okay, I'm trying to behave. It's working with Luke, mostly because I lose any teasing I do. I always lose. So I feel like I have to compensate by keep trying to get a shallow victory. But I mean, most guys understand the urinal game, right?
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
right. That's a really good example of male intuition about what's situational awareness, proximity, and what that means.
Yeah.
I think a lot of us are aware of where we stand in rooms, right?
Yes, very much so. There's also a lot of cultural elements that come into play with this concept, where like the distances that we maintain from each other will change from culture to culture, but the dynamic of maintaining distances doesn't change. It's very common. It's
correct. The distance is different, but the idea that you should maintain this, that's one thing I try to get over, and I can't get over when I travel the world, is people who come inside my space. It's like I want to keep them over there. Right? I try it, and I just can't get away from it. I always find myself stepping back. So you're talking about not just you've talked about how perceiving spaces before, right?
Right.
Awareness and so could you just go? You said awareness of your environment, right?
Yeah.
Right?
So in previous chapter
Baseline.
6, we talked about atmospherics, which is the overall feel of the space that you're in, right? It's the reading of the room, right? Of whatever situation you find yourself in. So you're taking everything in and getting kind of a tone of what the space means, so that you can build that baseline, so that you can observe anomalies, right? That's the whole point.
Okay. So the next step is what anomalies? Is that the next?
Yeah. So the next step down from that, after you've read the room and you got a feel for a room, and you can see what is normal in that room, what exists in that space, then we can start drilling down. And that's this proxemics concept is the next level down from that atmospherics concept. So we've gone from reading the room. Now we're going to start reading the individuals in the room and seeing how they're moving through the space, how they're orienting themselves in the space, and things like that. The chapter is actually, it's called Proxemics. Give yourself more than 2 seconds to react. There's a lot of other elements that come into play with proximity when it comes to threat detection, threat response, and things like that. Right? So it's actually a pretty deep concept, and there's a ton of research on this field of proxemics that we pull from in the space of situational awareness to use for our left of bed, keeping ourselves out in front of bad things happening. There's a lot of things that get communicated through proximity that we just.
There's certain times you want to be near a door.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Certain times you want a piece of furniture between you and someone else.
But the example you provide is a great one, at least for the guys, right? Every guy that's been out in public space has been into a bathroom that has urinals, right? And so if you're the first one in the bathroom, you're going to go to one end or the other, or you're going to go right in the middle, right? I mean, you're going to pick a spot and you're going to go. Now, the next guy that comes in and goes to urinal, he's going to leave a gap. He's going to create as much distance between your peeing and his peeing as he can, right? And that's a proxemic expectation that's just socially accepted, right? Nobody tells us to do that. We just accept that that's the rule of using urinals in a public restroom, right? And it'll keep filling up like that. Now, one of the things we're looking for when it comes to proxemics, the reason we want to be able to understand them is so that we can build a baseline, and we want to build a baseline so that we can recognize deviations from that baseline, what I call anomalies, right? So if that in that same situation in the bathroom, if the guy walks in and stands right next to you in the urinal right next to you, we would call that a proxemic violation.
That's right.
Why we're learning the field of proxemics is so that we can understand and recognize proxemic violations, so we can use the cues of those violations to assist us in making decisions about how to respond to potential threats in our environment and challenges in our environment, or leverage opportunities in our environment, right? So I mean, we're just reading signals.
Yep.
Right.
Okay. Excuse me.
Yeah.
But this chapter, you want to focus on how people move through spaces.
Move and orient. It's really there's a few things that I want to touch on here. The moving through space is important. How we position ourselves when we're not moving is also important. But I also there's this concept that's very important in this, in that's the impact that proximity has on your skill level or your ability to respond to things. Right. I mean,
is this just response time?
It's not just response time. You're a shooter, right? You've fired weapons, right? You've fired a pistol before, right? The untrained shooter, if you put a target out at 50 feet, the untrained shooter is not going to hit that target, no matter how many times they fire at it. I mean, they make it lucky here and there, but the untrained shooter is just not going to hit that target, right? So you move that target to 2 feet in front of that shooter, the untrained shooter is going to hit that target every single time. And that's what I mean when I say proximity negates skill. So you could be the best shooter in the world, and at 50 feet, you're going to hit the target consistently, where the untrained shooter is not. But at 2 feet, that untrained shooter is going to be just as effective with that firearm as you are at 2 feet. And so that's what I mean when I say that proximity eliminates skill, right? And the same thing's true of any, you want to set up a little cup and use a ping pong ball and throw it in the cup, right? If you're right on top of it, you're going to hit that cup very often. Take 5 steps back, you're going to start missing. Take another 5 steps back, you're going to start missing. Right? So proximity has a huge impact on physical skills, right? I mean, our ability to affect what we're trying to affect. So we want to, that's part of what we have to be aware of and pay attention to when we're exploring the dynamics of how people are moving through spaces, right? If there's a threat in the space, we want to keep as much distance from ourselves and that threat as possible, because just like it negates our skill, it negates their skill. You know, the guy that wants to stab you can't do it if you're 20 feet away from him.
Right.
Unless he's really well trained at throwing a knife.
Right. So, what is so the first argument you make here is proximity eliminates skill.
Yeah.
Right. So that's the first rule, right?
Yeah, and it does so in another way as well. In addition to just the physical component of it, it does reduce our ability to respond to the signals that we're picking up. Right. If the guy's, we'll say 50 feet away again, and I can already start to see anomalies, this guy is a source of anomalies in the space, then I've got
that's what I was looking
time
for.
to respond. Yeah.
I was looking for the anomalies connection. Thank you.
Yeah. Then I have time to respond to those anomalies I'm recognizing. Right. Whereas if that guy's already 3, 4, 5 feet away from me, then I have much less opportunity, much less time to pick up on the anomaly and then make a decision about the anomaly and respond to the anomaly based on the cues that I've given. So it eliminates our physical skills and it eliminates our perceptual skills that we've developed. Right. So that proximity really plays a huge role in how we're able to navigate our space effectively and safely. And so that's kind of what that section on how proximity eliminates skills is getting at, is that it plays a very important factor. It's a very important factor in our own ability to keep ourselves safe.
So just walk through again. So you walk in a room, you get a feel for the room, you develop a baseline, you identify anomalies. I don't know if there's something I'm missing before you get into proximities.
No, it's a greater detail in the establishment of the baseline.
Right, I'm just trying to, just try to ritualize by repetition.
Yeah.
the
So
process.
and so all of these things kind of flow back and forth between each other, right? So there's a few major domains, and we'll get into the other ones in later discussions. But there's the atmospherics, there's the proxemics, there's the kinesics, and then there's the biometrics. Those are the four big ones that I focus on in the training that I do, right? And so the atmospherics is the big picture. It's the forest.
Mhm.
Right? Then we can narrow it down to proxemics, and it's not a stop start. It's just as we're looking at the atmospherics, then as we're exploring things and getting signals from the entire atmosphere, we're going to focus our attention on anything that's giving off anything of significance. And that's when we start applying the proxemic evaluations, right? So we switch from atmospherics to proxemics. Like, okay, I'm picking up something over here. So how are these people moving through the space? What can that tell me about what's going on? And then if I have to dig further, then I'm going to slip into the kinesics. What is their body language telling me? How are they presenting their physicality?
So
And then I'm looking for, are they sweating inappropriately? The biometrics, are they sweating inappropriately? Are their pupils dilating inappropriately? Is there reddening going on, or is there vasoconstriction going on? So they're paling and things like that, right? So it's a dynamic that flows in and out. And then I get back down to that level and I haven't picked up anything, so I start expanding my awareness again, back up, working back towards the atmospherics, right? So it's kind of a flow in and out of the details.
right,
Right?
sure.
So I start looking at the forest, then I look at the trees, then I look at the forest, then I look at the trees, right? And I'm constantly moving through those.
So I'm going to humor that. So when I walk into a room, are there any drunk people?
Yes.
Are there any people that don't like me?
Right.
Where's the cheese and crackers plate and the booze? And are there any women that'd be fun to hit on?
Right. Yeah. Those are all things to pay close attention to as you walk into a space.
And is there, in my case, is there a customer or employee that's going to try to weasel something out of me?
And you can pretty much assume yes for all of those questions in most rooms, right? Somebody's angry at you. Somebody's going to try to sell you something. Right?
Somebody's dangerous. Somebody's dangerous. Someone's negatively predisposed to you.
Yep.
People might be positive predisposed to you, but they want something. There might be people you're positively predisposed to, and then there's munchies, right? I mean, resources, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah. So I open the chapter, which is kind of a general, description of what proxemics is. Then I move on to how proximity eliminates skill. Then I describe this other general concept, which is the 25-foot rule. And you've probably heard of this one. The police use they call it a 21-foot rule, but more recent research says it's actually a little bit bigger space than that you need. And that's the time it takes for you to pull out your weapon and fire on an attacker before they can get you. That it's about 2 seconds. And 21 feet is what they thought was about the time it took for an attacker to move that 2 seconds. So that's about how far they can move in 2 seconds. It actually turns out it's a little bit longer. That's closer to between 25 and 30 feet that the attacker can move in that 2 seconds, right? So it's more like a 25-foot rule. And that's why I call it the 25-foot rule. And that means that if an attacker initiates their attack from 25 feet away, you have time to pull out a weapon and fire on that attacker before they're on you. Right? Mm-hmm. So that's about 2 seconds, right? And that's the rule of thumb that the police training uses, right? So I introduced that same concept.
And it's funny how unintuitive that is.
Yeah, it seems way farther than you think.
You think, exactly.
Yeah, and one of the kind of mental images I like to use for people, just because so many people have access to it, is it's about the width of a neighborhood street.
Yes.
Those streets are about 29 feet. So if you can just picture about the width of a neighborhood street, that's what you're looking at.
And you'd think that would be far.
That's about 4
but it's not.
Widths. Yeah, it's not. It's not far at all. It's about 4 car widths, 4 standard car widths. And that's what
you got to maintain quite a bit of distance from a hostile.
Yeah, the more the better, right? Again, back to our proximity eliminate skill, right? The more the better. And that's one of the reasons, this left a bang concept that I advocate for and that I offer through the material that I teach. Even if you can't completely avoid the negative encounter, the threat, the attack, right? You can, if you're paying attention to the signals, you can get distance from it. So it's harder for that threat to damage you, to harm you, to kill you, right? So even if that's the only outcome that you're gaining in a certain situation, you're still being left a bang by getting further away from the threat. So it's not always about completely avoiding it, because you catch it, you catch it 5 minutes before it happens. Sometimes you're catching it 3 or 4 seconds before it happens, but that's enough to get you another 10 feet, 20 feet away from the bad guy coming at you, and negating all of the skills he's trying to employ to cause harm to you, right? So I mean, all this stuff kind of plays together in those kind of ways too, right? We're using this stuff to buy ourselves time in a situation that threatens us or challenges us.
Just remind me, of course, I don't know how you, I mean, I'm a late middle-aged fellow now. So I never really think about childhood that much, right? I mean, mostly what I think about is business, right?
Right.
So my relationships, my business. But, I'm just like, well, I grew up and we had fights at the bus stop, in school, at recess, right? In the classrooms, right? This is like a normal part of life, right?
Right.
And,
Well,
and
that kid environment, there was 2 guys that could talk smack to anybody, right? The big guy and
yes,
the fast guy.
the fast guy, yes.
Right. Those were the 2 guys that could talk smack to anybody and knew they could get away with it. Because to hurt him, you got to catch him.
It's funny, the little guy I don't know can't remember his name. I mean, I can see him in my mind's eye perfectly.
Right.
But he would destroy that big guy, whose name was Steve Apple, all the time.
Yeah.
And it was just like once a week they'd go at it as if it was a thing, and he'd always just destroy him. And it was really because he was just fast. He hit you in the face really hard too, but I mean,
yeah, exactly. And the story I used to introduce the chapter is similar to that, right? It was part of training when I was still in the military, but it was combat training, right? And I was paired with a guy that happened to be a Golden Glove boxer, right? And I'm not a Golden Glove boxer. I was a wrestler, and I've had
me too.
Schoolyard fights and stuff like that, but I was not a boxer. And so we're paired up to do combat training, which is a lot of hitting, right? It's a lot of direct boxing style movement in at this stage of training, anyways. And so I just expected that this is going to be a slog. I'm just going to have to suffer through getting my rear end handed to me through this whole encounter, right? Then we found out, we were presented with the field that we had to engage each other in, the arena, right? And it turns out it's a 4x4 foot walled square.
Yeah.
That eliminated all of this guy's advantages. All of his footwork didn't matter. All of his all of his arm length didn't matter. None of his boxing advantages mattered at that point, beyond his ability to hit hard.
Yeah.
But all of my disadvantages disappeared.
Right.
That's it. All because of the proximity that limited.
And you had that thick skull working to your advantage.
Right. Exactly. So I'm not gonna claim that I came out as the victor. We fought many times, right? And I'm not gonna claim I came out as the victor on those, but I held my own far better than I ought to have against a well-trained boxer in a situation like that, right? And so proximity plays a huge role in this situation. So after I go through the general concepts in the chapter, then I actually get into what the science of proxemics is. There's an actual whole field of scientific study about this stuff. There's a guy named it's a professor named Edward Hall, who back in the 50s really started formalizing the study of proxemics. And his research it's fascinating to read through. He's got like shorthand symbols for all of the various dynamics you can observe in proxemic.
Yeah, but he's not saying you should do this alone. He's saying this is what people do.
Yes.
Right. It's reading their behavior.
It's reading their behavior. Absolutely. This is this is like the big kickoff into behavioral analysis and all the stuff that we're doing, right? Not just situational awareness, but we're actually exploring behavioral analysis here. Right, because how people are the behavior they're exhibiting from the frame of proxemics tells us a lot about what their intent is, what their feelings are at the moment. How comfortable they are in the environment, how uncomfortable they are in the environment.
And somebody's thinking about you. You can tell.
Yeah,
and it's not good.
Yeah, and so Professor Hall is actually the one that coined the term proxemics to describe this field of study, the study of proximity, right? Not a huge stretch, but he's the one that came up with it, right? So again, we use proxemics, or the study of proxemics, to be aware of what they're communicating to us. So they're communicating us intent, and we can use it to predict behavior, right? So it draws very heavily from evolutionary biology, right? Studying both humans and other animals in as many environments as possible to see how complex organisms move through space and what they respond to.
Now you go through that just for when you teach this stuff, you go through all this stuff, right?
Yeah.
We're just reviewing the content of the book, right? I mean,
exactly. Yeah, we're reviewing the content of the book, and even the book itself. It's a primer, right? Which means it's a base level familiarization and instruction of the book. It's the minimum required to operate in this domain. It's not the advanced form of it. So I don't,
could I be as manly and competent and in charge and peaceful of mind as you are if I took your class?
Yeah. Yes. That's the goal, right? I mean, the goal of all of it, when it comes to the situational awareness and behavioral analysis stuff, my goal there with the people I teach is I want you not to be walking through environments where you're in a state of anxiety because you know all of these threats potentially exist in that environment. What I want to provide for people is a state of relaxed readiness where you have a competence, where you have a confidence in your competence to respond to rather than react to anything that emerges out of that environment.
Like a 15-round pistol and a set of brass knuckles.
Right. Exactly.
That makes me feel safe.
Well, and I say frequently that the only safety you ever really have is the safety you carry with you.
Yes.
And, depending on who I'm talking to, immediately people's minds jump to that means I'm carrying a gun or something like that. And that's true. You want those tools, as many tools that you can utilize, but you also want these skills. You want these competencies. You're carrying those with you into every single situation you go into. Even where you can't carry a weapon, you can still carry these skills.
Awareness. Yeah.
So that's what I mean when I say the only safety you have is the safety you carry with you. So let's build as much permanent safety into ourselves as we can.
Yeah.
And that's what this stuff is doing for us here.
Yeah.
So back to the science of proximity. People, we use space to signal to each other. We signal status, we signal relationship, we signal level of comfort, we signal all that stuff. Think about, in a crowd, you can pick out who the couples are by how close they are. You can pick out who the couples are by, are they facing each other or are they facing away from each other? You can tell if a couple in a crowd just had an argument because they're going to be close to each other, but they're going to tilt their bodies, they're going to orient their bodies away from each other. I mean, we could read all this without knowing them. We could read all this without interacting with them. We could just by looking at how they're spatially utilizing the space. We could read all of these signals about what's going on in people's worlds and what they're doing, and how they're feeling. Right? It's crazy that we can get so much information. And again, like all elements of situational awareness, context and relevance play a huge role in our observation and evaluation of proxemics. Right? We talked about the bathroom earlier. Another example I like to use when I'm talking about this is elevators. Right? It normally,
same problem without the humor.
Was that
same question was without the humor.
Question? Well, yeah, different humor, anyways. Where I'm the area where I live, it's a lot of Scandinavian stuff like that. It's a much farther distance for that personal space than it is, in a lot of warmer climates, for example.
Yes.
It tends to flow along those lines. So because of that, things like elevators, they represent what we call here proxemic violations, right? When somebody invades or breaks proxemic rules, breaks the proxemic baseline, we call that a proxemic violation, right? So an elevator inherently is a violation, a proxemic violation. So is waiting in a line, right? We all do it, but it's a proxemic violation. Now, we don't tick it off or we don't register it as a proxemic violation because of the context of the in which the violation occurs, right? The elevator is a confined space, so we have no choice but to violate proxemics in that situation. Same thing when we're in a queue, when we're waiting in a line somewhere. It's a confined space, and it's a socially acceptable violation of proxemics, right? So we don't register it as
you could,
an anomaly.
If it's a woman, I'm going to the other side of the fucking. All right, if there's a woman in there, I go to the wherever she is not, so that she doesn't feel my space. And usually
right, exactly, and that's they actually study elevator behavior when they're looking at this proxemic stuff, and consistently, if there's one person on the elevator, they'll stand roughly in the middle in general. If another person enters the elevator, both of them will move off to the sides. They don't say this to each other. They don't make any agreement about doing this. It's just the natural behavior that emerges out of that situation. If a third person enters, they will try to equidistant themselves, all three of the people in the elevator, and that will continue as the elevator fills up. Everybody will try to find as much capture as much personal space in that situation as they can. And
Yep.
that creates this equidistance between each other. And these are this goes back to midbrain stuff. Animals everywhere do this.
Yes, of course.
Right. We want to maintain a safety space around ourselves. It plays right into our need for safety and security. Which is one of those bottom two layers of the hierarchy of needs. Right. And so this plays right into all of that stuff. So Professor Hall, right, he identified in his work, he identified 4 consistent proxemic zones, and I go over these in the book as well, right? And these, the exact, like I said earlier, the exact distances differ by culture, and of course violations occur in different situations that are contextually and relevant. But the distinctions, the fact that there are these 4 zones is consistent across all cultures. All cultures exhibit these same 4 zones. It's just how they define each zone is a little bit differently. The amount of space that they give for each zone is a little bit differently, right? The interval. So those zones are the intimate zone, which is obviously the real close physical contact zone, right? So and intimate doesn't necessarily mean sexual contact. It just means anyone that's going to be.
Damn, I was hoping you were going to go there.
Well, that, you know, we ought to be careful about who we let into that zone as well. But, for example, here, you know, if I'm sitting in my chair reading a book, my children have absolutely no problem at all just plopping themselves into my lap. Right? There's no hesitation or anything like that. They are allowed in. There's no violation for them to enter my intimate zone. Right. But that's because of the relationship I have with them. And anybody observing that can pick up that signal of that we have a relationship with each other if they see that behavior. Right. So I'm giving it myself and my children are giving off that signal by expressing that behavior, right? Just by demonstrating that behavior. So the next one is the personal zone. This is where we allow our friends and acquaintances into this space comfortably, right? It's not a violation for our friends and closer acquaintances to enter our personal zone, right? And so that's the, you know, depending on where you are in the world, this is roughly an arm's length away from you, right? You know, it's that 2 to 4 feet in general, at least in the Western world, it's about 2 to 4 feet for that personal zone. Then we have the social zone, which we allow strangers to enter without it being a proxemic violation. But it tends to be strangers that we have some reason to be engaged with, you know, like the wait staff or the clerks or the attendants or things like that, right? We're not comfortable with those kind of strangers in that social zone. You know, strangers that we might encounter with or that we're sharing an experience with, like we're all at the same fair together, we're all at the same concert together, we're all at the same, you know, event together. We'll allow those people that we have some sort of connection to, but they're still strangers, into our social zone. And then beyond that, out to that 25 foot, we have the public zone, which is people that we're aware of in our personal space, but that we have no interest in at least yet have interest in interacting with. Right? They just happen to be in our personal space, but they're not. We don't mark them as a proxemic violation because they're not doing anything to create themselves or to stand out as a proxemic violation. And those 4 zones, that the intimate zone, the personal zone, the social zone, and the public zone, are very, very consistent across all human cultures. Right? I mean, we see those same zones everywhere.
Is it not worth? I'm just asking this because I'm stupid. Right? Is it not worth? Because in my view, I have not public zone. In other words, I don't want you in my 21 feet.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And so is that all? Would that be included too? Be a thread zone?
And you know, it's funny because the more training you have or the more awareness you have of this kind of stuff, you start to make more of those distinctions. These are the ones that are just observable across everybody, right? But if you're conscious of it and you're more aware of it, then yeah, you're going to start defining, all right, I anyone that enters this space, I don't want them there, so I'm going to be paying attention to them, right? That's more of a personal take on it than it is a just a natural, normal human behavior take on it, right? That's less common. But it's a valuable distinction. Basically, anyone inside your zones, which is that out to about 25, 30 feet, right? Anyone in there is somebody you ought to be paying attention to.
I had a guy, a guy, young guy, amazing guy, did triathlon? What's the one that's got 4? Is there the one that's got, anyway, he got knocked on the head while he was swimming and he drowned in that part of it and died. Got an employee, but he's really more than an employee, right? And this is somebody, he's also widely loved. It's like, why does that have to happen to those guys? So we go to this party for him, and of course I'm traveling around the world. I don't even know this is going on, but I happen to be in town, and one of the girls calls me up and says, can you make sure you come to the party because we're doing a party. I get there. There's somebody I bought her company a long time ago, and she failed, and she went on to did another company, and she'd okay there. And and I was like, I just need to stay away from her, right? She's just one of those Karens.
Right.
And then so she gets a couple of drinks in her, and I'm like, oh Christ, right? She comes over. She's, I'm proud of how much I hate you.
That's rough.
Okay. Of course, I'm thinking, I understand why you're single.
Right.
And it's not just because you're ugly. But it's one of those things where just like you get in these situations where that happens, where it's other people where it's like you don't want to impose, like I don't want to make people feel they have an obligation to pay attention to me. Right. So there's that too. So you have all these things you're trying to respect in this world. And it's actually, and I think I'm trying to tie what you're teaching in and say that there's a tendency for people to look at what you're teaching as survival, and it's not. No. It's just using that baseline to teach you others, to the minimum skills you need to develop the skill I just talked about, right? And so what I keep coming back to is I'm complimenting you is your insight here, in that you need to give people these basics in order for them to develop the later. And I just think it's fascinating because, for me, I know when I do a room, it's like I'm mostly looking for what opportunities and threats are there, and most of the time it's threats.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And that's not because it's a threat, like it could be a harm.
No.
It could be a reputation threat. It could be a possible manners violation. It could be, I don't want to have to say something negative to you. Right.
It could be somebody just consuming your time that you don't want to have consumed.
You just want consumed, right?
Yeah, so it's just, and that's absolutely the case with all of this stuff, right? That's why I really try to make a distinction between this is not survival skills. These are human skills. This is, that's why I always point back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. That foundation, we have to have that foundation in place in order for anything up above that foundation to work correctly. Right? It's not, they're not separate from, the stuff we're talking about. Proxemics is not separate from transcendence.
Yes.
Right? It's one of the things you have to have in place in order to reach transcendence.
Right.
It's an understanding of
what I've said this before, but I'm going to just push this out there. That I read your book the first time, and I only understood half of what you were trying to get. It's only talking to you I really understood what you're really getting at. Yeah. And that's partly my fault, because when I have a certain pattern when I read things. I read a lot of stuff. And so basically I'm saying, what's the gist here? Is there anything new I have to understand?
right? Yes. Yeah.
And so I missed the subtlety of what you were running across.
Yeah.
But when I landed the book, I wanted more. And when I'm talking to you, I'm like, well, now I want the next book. And I was like, well, Luke, I know what you're thinking. I was like, hey, it costs money and time and effort, and I got to deal with this book sales, and I'm already running these courses and this stuff. And but I'm selfish, if you're going to share if you got the wisdom, it's a moral obligation for you to sell it, give it to the rest of us, right? Did I put a little guilt trip in? It's not going to work on you. Right?
No, that's absolutely my intent is to get deeper into those things, but I have to get this foundation in place for people.
Yes.
Right? That's what I'm working on now. Is like you said, if you're just trying to pull the gist out of the book, then you're going to miss the key elements there, because the key elements is the rebuilding of this entire foundation. Right? There is no gist to it.
Well, I made it for an obvious reason. I just have this in my head. Right. I didn't understand until you started to, and other guys on the team explained, no, these people are broken because they don't have this.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. And I'm like, how do we go from you could, when it was like school and recess and Boy Scouts and I don't know what they called us. We got to drive around with cops and learn how to be police and spend a day in jail and all those shit, right? We get to work with there was a name for it, explorers or something like that. So, we had church clubs, 4-H clubs, we had summer camp, we had, all this stuff. And so, you learn this stuff just by like, well, I live in the upstate New York and we go camping, which isn't territorially that different from where you live, really.
Right.
So I go up there, we go camping and you're building fires and doing all the outdoorsy stupid shit, right? So I just forget that's not universal knowledge anymore.
No, it's not. We learned a lot of it. That's part of the problem, I think, is we learned a lot of the stuff through exposure.
Yes.
So we took our knowledge of it, our competence of it for granted.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't something we ever had to develop. It was something that.
What do people do if they haven't been punched in the face?
Exactly. Yeah.
And if you've never been punched, I've been punched in the face a bunch.
Yes. Yeah. It's this terrifying thing that's going to destroy.
Except it's not any longer.
Except it's not, right? Yeah, it's not. And that's how a lot of this stuff works. Is that's why I tie it to this continuously spreading sense of anxiety as well. It's because without these things in place, the world is a terrifying, terrible place to be. At just a base level. I mean, imagine any.
Is that why we have so much mindfulness?
Yeah, I think it plays a big role in it. Yeah, but I mean, think of any animal. Any animal that is allowed to achieve adulthood without having gone through the process of exposure to the skills and competencies it needs to survive its environment. That animal is going to be broken. That animal is going to be dysfunctional. It's going to
afraid. It's what we see with you're right. It's what we see in wild animals that are put in bad circumstances. They're just afraid.
Yeah, and that's what we're seeing with people.
Mouse utopia, same difference.
Yeah, it's exactly that. We've created that for humanity in the West because we abandoned these things, and so it's not just that it shouldn't be a surprise to us. We should expect exactly what we're seeing now, given that we've abandoned these things, the development of these things, right? So, and I do, and that's why I'm trying to fix it. It's because of that. So the next section of the book,
he makes a living doing this, which is fascinating to me. All right. So the next section is push versus pull.
Yeah, next section is push versus pull. And if you remember back in the atmospherics, we touched on this a little bit in the atmospherics chapter. This is where we really start looking at what is occurring when there's these pushes and pulls, right? And what that means is that people are going to be pushed. So proxemic pushes, proxemic pulls. The push means that they're responding to stimuli of fear, a violation of safety, a threat, distrust, disinterest, or the unknown, right? Those are the major things that push us proximically, right? We're going to move ourselves away from the sources of fear, safety, threat, distrust, disinterest, Then we have proxemic pulls, which are the things that are going to draw us towards them. We're going to physically move in a space towards things that are creating a proxemic pull. So that's things that are occurring because of attraction, because of need, because of curiosity.
Like easy girls with tattoos and purple hair.
Exactly, because of relationship, because of association, right? So those are the big factors that create proxemic pull. Right. So, attraction, curiosity, relationship, those are absolutely things that are the sources of proxemic pulls. Now, we want to be aware of those because each one of those proxemic pushes and proxemic pulls represents an anomaly to the baseline.
Yeah.
Or it would be a pull. It would just be part of the actual atmosphere of the space already. Right. So if it's creating a push or creating a pull, then we have to evaluate it as an anomaly and find out, is it a proxemic violation? Does it represent something that we need to, incorporate into our decision matrix to determine whether there's a threat in place or not, right? So that's why the concept of proxemic pushes and pulls are important, because they're always an anomaly.
How long does it take people to, because since I do it automatically, I don't even think about it. How long does it take a person to learn this behavior when you teach it to them?
Learning it is it's not very long, right? Most of the classes I do, like when I do an organizational class, it's about a 4-hour class. Now to develop competence, you have to take it out of the class and start applying it. Right. That's going to, depending on how effectively you're applying it or how consciously you're applying it, it's going to take a few weeks to a few months of being aware of it and putting it into play, putting it into practice.
Well, it's like any other behavior.
Yeah. Before you're just internalized it and it's become part of how you.
3 weeks to a habit.
Yeah.
3 months to a permanent habit,
Yep.
unconscious
So it's the
habit.
same, it follows those same dynamics, right? So yeah, so proxemic pushes and pulls. Again, these are all cues that the people in your environment are giving off that we can use to make decisions about what's going on in that environment, right? It's all information that's being sent to us. Most of us, because we never developed the skill to read that information, aren't leveraging it. It's just blowing right by us, right? I mean, we use some of it no matter what. We're all using some of it sometimes, like the bathroom, the elevator, et cetera. We're always picking up on it, but we're not leveraging it to our advantage.
Example of why you need to play team sports.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Just this will teach you the substitute version of it, right?
Yeah. So the big takeaway from this section though is that you have to be able to recognize the pushes and the pulls, right? It's important to be able to recognize both.
Now, my favorite subject is next.
Yeah, marking your territory is the next subject we get into when it comes to proxemics, right? Just like we have the zones, our personal zones, we also have we do this, we apply the same kind of dynamic when it comes to our territories, right? And we tend to mark those territories, right? So territories we spend the most time in, for us, those would be our primary territories. Like your home, your office would be a primary territory for you, things like that, right? Whereas other people may enter that space, like you may have a guest enter your home, it won't be their primary territory.
Right.
So it's the same space, but because of the dynamic of the people in that space, because of the context for each one of them, it changes how that territory is marked for them, right? One of the examples I use here is think of the classroom, right? The professor uses that classroom all day, every day. For that professor, that classroom, like if we talk about Professor Hall, when he was teaching this stuff, he's in that classroom all day, every day. That space, that classroom becomes a primary space for that professor. The students are rotating in and out of that classroom all day, and each semester, different students are rotating in and out of that classroom. So for the students, that's going to be at best a secondary territory for them. It's never going to be a primary territory for them. So the exact same space, it holds a different marking for the individual, right? So they're going to display slightly different behaviors in that space. So things that represent a proxemic violation are going to be different for the different people in that space.
Learn something about myself. You just taught me something about myself. You're odd. I just I'm hyper gregarious.
Yeah.
But one of the things I'm doing is I'm actually laying out my territory.
Yes. Yeah.
And I said until you taught me this right here, I would not have understood the origin of that behavior. What I'm doing is I'm ensuring with my gregariousness that I've covered the area and made it safe.
Yeah, and that's very consistent in that form of behavior.
Weird. That's how can I get to my age and not understand what that behavior is?
Yeah, and anybody watching that's familiar with the concepts of proxemics and how they apply to behavioral analysis can watch that behavior and recognize exactly what's occurring, and then incorporate that into the baseline that they have to rebuild for that space. You've entered that space, you've created this territory marking behavior. I can observe that, and I can incorporate that. Okay, is that a violation in this context, or is that just me needing to describe my baseline now to incorporate that territorial marking? Right. So it all just keeps building up and adding to the total number of signals that we're getting and that we have available to make decisions from. Right. And that's what we're getting at with all of this stuff, just being able to read those signals, right? Because we're all giving off these signals all the time. Even when we're not aware we're doing it, we're still all giving off these signals all the time. And it's all tied to very real human needs. Right. So it's very consistent across all people because we all have common needs. Right. So we can watch these commonalities emerge and these behaviors emerge and make actual inferences based on these behaviors, right? They tell us intent. They allow us to predict behavior.
So you can tell a lot about people, how they control the territory.
Yeah. What that territory means to them, how comfortable they are in that territory. Like if you're strongly trying to assert a marking of a territory that is clearly not your primary territory, that's going to indicate to me a level of discomfort.
I don't know if it's discomfort. I always feel like, this is interesting. So is it okay if I think about this for a bit?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's an interesting subject. Because one of the many things I've learned from you going through this, is that I know that as an autist, if you don't remove the nervousness, you come off as weird.
Yes.
Right? So I've developed that behavior. As CEO, you want to remove the feeling that you're a threat, right? You want, or that you're going to criticize or anything. When you walk into a room, you want people to know that, oh, it's Curt, he's going to help us or talk to us or make us laugh or give us or answer some questions. The truth is, I never show up to do tell you something bad. I send someone else, right? And then if I'm in a public place where people don't know me, I use both of those techniques, which is I'm here, I see you, you see me, we have to respect each other now. Right. And I don't realize what I'm doing, right? I just do it all the time. So if you were to go down the street that I lived on, which is under downtown Center Street in Kiev, they all know who the fuck I am, right? I mean, right. And so and I didn't realize that it's marking my territory as a safe zone, but not just for me.
No, not yeah. And that's what I was getting at. Is I'm not saying that you are the one uncomfortable. You're responding to the potential that
of uncomfortability of others
for people. Yeah,
it's the same thing as the elevator thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So you take. I always thought of it as I'm taking your stress off the table.
Yeah, I've learned that my presence can create X.
Yes.
Accommodate and account for that in my behavior.
Right.
We can read signals like that from people all the time.
Like I remember my wife telling me we were at an art show, right? And I disagreed with something. And you know when you use that voice versus hey, I was thinking the whole place goes fucking quiet, and she's like, you can't use that voice with this kind of people. And so she said you've got today they'd call it the white male voices of oppression or something like that.
Right.
But what she meant was you can't use the dominant male voice in this kind of art venue. Yeah. So it's just interesting how you can mark your territory through your body language, through the use of your voice, through your interactions. Yep. And that marking your territory might just be trying to create a safe space. Yep. For everybody to remove anxiety. That's why you see, the natural politicians, which is what kind of personality have, is you just want to go in there and you want to boom, nuke anybody's anxiety.
Right.
Bill Clinton's the greatest guy in the world at this. I mean, you watch him do it. He was a master of being the nuclear bomb of removing anxiety from people and making them feel important when he's talking to them.
Yeah.
Sorry, I learned a lot from your little piece there, so
no,
I ran around with it a little bit.
From the proxemics view, we could turn the sound off on an engagement like that and still know exactly what's happening in that room just by how people are moving themselves in response to that market. Right? People, if he's successful at making people feel more comfortable, they're going to orient themselves towards him. If he's making them feel good about being there or curious about what his presence there, he's going to start pulling them towards him, right? We can just using proxemics, we can describe exactly what you described verbally just by watching the space, turn all the sound off and not really know what's going on. We can still completely understand just by reading the cues that we're getting what's going on in that environment, right? And that's what the study of this stuff does.
How come this is so unfair. How come I can read body language, right, to some level, but I'm not really good at facial expressions, which you'll notice I'll say, what does that face mean? I'll say that pretty often. And I always think of it, I always say, well, women can do that, right? But I wonder if I just don't understand fear. Does that make sense? Yeah. I just don't understand. I don't understand it. And women are just most of the time when women are detecting something, it's an anxiety or fear response. And I just would never have that. So I don't know. Just fascinating. Yeah, all right. So now I learned something else deep from this chapter. Okay. What's
So
the
the
next
next
one?
the next section is called the unclear and present danger, right?
Unclear and present danger.
One of the things that's important about this stuff is because we can start using it to recognize anomalies that represent threats, right? Like if you're in a train station or a bus station or something like that, everyone's kind of just standing around waiting for the bus to get there, and there's somebody moving through the space aggressively and they're violating proximity of everybody they pass through, right? That's somebody you're going to want to pay attention to. You're watching proxemic violations occur over and over again, right? Because guys moving through people's spaces completely disregarding the context and the relevance of his proxemic violations, right? It just doesn't make sense in a space like that for him to be violating proximity the way he's violating. So that stands out as an anomaly, and because it's a proxemic violation that represents an anomaly, and one that we ought to be paying attention to, because there's something is motivating that person to do those proxemic violations. In the same vein, if you're in that same situation and you see somebody widely skirting all of the clusters of people and staying super far away, unreasonably far away from everybody, again, that's going to be a proxemic violation that falls into the category of something you need to pay attention to. There's something motivating that person to stay as far away from people as they can as they move through that space. So, it's the same space that are two very different proxemic violations occurring, but both of which represent anomalies you ought to be incorporating, being aware of, taking account of, right? Because
It's just like, you cross the street way in advance of somebody that looks like trouble,
yes,
right? I mean, it's just, or sometimes what I do is I turn around, I walk right at them,
right,
right?
Right.
And I'm just looking at them. I think people, I don't know, I don't understand. I'm 5'7". No one ever has ever challenges me ever anywhere. I don't know if it's just because I'm really good at avoiding bad circumstances, or there's something. I mean, I'm not exactly a scary guy, right?
No, but you have, because you had exposure to a lot of this stuff, you already present a state of relaxed readiness. You're not walking around as a victim. You're not walking around as vulnerable.
Although your next point is really important, which is the fucking idiot cell phone people.
Oh,
Jesus
man.
Christ, man.
It is the bane of the situational awareness world, the cell phone. And I love them as tools. I love them as devices. I love being able to contact family as needed. But man, we get so focused on them that it really undermines our engagement with our surroundings, right? And so that's
Driving is bad enough, but
right,
walking around on streets.
yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I tell this all the time, but we all have our go to sleep rituals, and I have to switch off the machine in my head. So one of the things I watch is all the accident videos from the day, right? I mean, stuff cracks me up, because the ability of humans to do ridiculous things never ceases to amaze me.
No.
The number of people that get run over holding on to watching their cell phones, is every day is just it's astounding.
Or people walking into poles or falling into holes. It's just, yeah. I talked earlier about that 25-foot rule, right? When you're staring at your phone, that 25 foot disappears. You no longer have that 25-foot rule. You have this distance from your phone to your face. That is now your awareness zone.
Yep.
And that's all the time you're going to have to react to anything coming at you,
which is no time at all.
No time at all. But it's ridiculous, right? So, and so obviously having your eyes glued to your phone makes you vulnerable in a space, right?
It's real easy. If you stop at a corner, you're next to a pole, or usually in most cities, there's a pole and there's the damn things for the newspapers or some other shit chained to it and whatever. There's a little bit of massa there. Okay, now I can look at my phone and I can plan out where I'm going to go, right? But I mean, walking around, or it's the same thing with I don't do it anymore because I don't travel like I used to. But I'm autistic, so I'm very sensitive to noise.
Right.
Like big cities make me agitated. So what I would do is I just put on the headphones and listen to my thing, but I don't keep it so loud I can't hear anything.
Right. Yeah.
It's just to create a regular, rational sound, and mostly it's not music, it's like a book or something, just to create that stable sound. And but I mean, not people walking around like, almost getting run over by cars. And I've done the same stupid thing everybody else has, is which I really, I should see who's this on the phone, right?
Right.
And I look at that too long. Now, it's one thing if you're driving like your usual Ford, but I'm driving my Porsche, and if I look down and look back up, I could have increased my speed by 70 miles per hour, without. Anyway, so
it also turns you into a hazard for others, because you're not observing
right.
any of the proxemic norms in that environment that you're moving through. So you're constantly violating those norms moving through that space. So people you're colliding with people, they have to jump out of your way. They have to, the car has to slam on its brakes because you weren't even paying attention as you started crossing the street, right? So you're introducing a lot of proxemic violation to the environment by not paying attention, by not being aware of what's going on in that space, right? So that's why I finish with a word about cell phones, is because they're everywhere, right? We have them all the time. And the same thing's true if you're just in a deep conversation with somebody as you're walking down the street. You're just not paying attention to what's going on around you. It's the same dynamic. But the lesson here is we don't get to completely detach from our environment as we're moving through it. At least not without
principal complaint about women in public is whenever they're interacting with somebody else, they're so engaged in the interface that you see them lose track of the environment. And I don't know what it is about men, why that's not so all encompassing for us.
Well, that seems to be changing.
Well, the feminization,
pointing themselves in the same direction. But well, and the other, from our frame, from the natural law frame, I view that as at least in some conditions, that's a form of entitlement or a form of parasitism. You're placing the demand for your observation of norms and even for your safety onto others involuntarily when you
you're externalizing the cost, right?
So it's just it's part of your responsibility as you move through a space to have some awareness of how you're moving through that space.
Okay, have we summed up this chapter? Because we
that's
finally did it in an hour.
And we finally did it in an hour. So that's what I'm trying to get out of that one, is just pay attention to what's going around you so that you can read the cues that's providing to you, because we're giving off information about this stuff all the time. How we navigate spaces, it actually communicates a lot of information if you can learn how to read it.
All right, thank you, love you, brother. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Please, everyone, show the book, please.
Absolutely. Without the glare.
Primal primer. The links and all the information is below, but of course you can find it on Amazon and everywhere else, and you can have it in audio, and I have it in digital form. I don't know, it doesn't come in, it's only paperback, it's not hard.
No, but there's a hardcover, there's hardcover, softcover, ebook, there's audio, there's even a video version of the book. So
man, you're just amazing. All right, love you, man. Thank you very much for this. And the audience, please investigate Luke's book and his business. Take care.
Thanks for your time.